Good day, everyone, and welcome. We're excited for you to join our webinar today. My name is Rose Singleton, and I'm one of the 4 interns at the Unitarian Universalist Association office at the United Nations, or the UU at UN. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box as you enter and get settled into the webinar. So we chose this topic, human rights and policing through a global lens, as we perceive that there's an increase in the militarization of police forces globally. Our esteemed panelists will explore how different police forces operate around the world in accordance with human rights laws and reflect on ways that the interactions can be improved. I'm passing the virtual mic off to Bruce Knotts, who is the director of the UU at UN office. He will be moderating this event and further introduce our speakers. Once again, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Rose. It is very wonderful to see all of you here. We've got a lineup of 3 outstanding speakers, and I'll be introducing each one in turn. Our first speaker is Johann O'hagan. He has worked for the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights since 2006. For 4.5 years, he was head of the Kathmandu field office in the UN Human Rights Office in Nepal. Currently, he is working in the UN Human Rights Headquarters in Geneva as the global focal point on integrating human rights into security forces with a special focus on law enforcement. So he's well suited for this topic. Johan has also worked with human rights in Cameroon, Indonesia, Kosovo, Sri Lanka, and in New York. Previously, Johan has had experience with the Swedish military police, working as a junior judge in a Swedish district court and working in a Swedish high security prison. Please welcome Johann O'hagan.
Thank you very much, Bruce and colleagues, for the invitation to speak at this webinar. And good morning, good afternoon to webinar panelists and participants of this webinar, wherever you are situated. I'm really glad to be able to join this discussion and especially to discuss some of the issues related to this topic. So I will be touching upon in my presentation a little bit around the global context of policing and the different human rights standards involved, particularly in relation to use of force. I will especially touch upon the trends around militarization of police. And I will unpack this from a human rights-based approach, and I will look perhaps specifically also into areas related to policing protests. And I hope to be able to round this off with linking into some of the broader issues that we see today in terms of working with police forces around the world to ensure that human rights is as good as possible integrated into their work. I would like to start this discussion with allowing you to picture this situation. You are standing on the streets in a quite a war-torn country where there's been a lot of conflict, and there is a protest march approaching. There is military and there is police on the streets, and there is a lot of tension in the air. This is a country and a capital where tear gas have been used almost on a daily, in a daily manner by security forces, and protests have been very tensed. And as everyone is waiting and seeing the procession, they hear the drums and so on, and is expecting perhaps a violent approach and a conflict. The first you see when the protesters arrive is actually a police officer, an unarmed police officer, a senior police officer walking in front of a crowd. And I was there at the time, and I saw how the tension really went down. And it turns out that it was a district police officer who had interacted with the protesters at hand. And he had agreed with them that I will facilitate and allow you to help you to have this protest. And I will lead the march, but there are certain rules, certain things that we need to agree upon so that there is no violence. And he walked unarmed in the front, and that really made this protest march a non-violent one. This was in 2008 in Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, which at the time was really coming out of a long conflict. And the police, as others, were struggling to move from a conflict paradigm towards a peaceful thing, and a peaceful approach by the police and how political parties were learning to come and work together instead of falling back into patterns of conflict. I wanted to start my presentation with sharing you this because I think it's really important when we look at the role of the police and how the police can act and work in different situations. But it is important as we go back to the topic of policing in a more global perspective to really unpack and understand that the police does not exist in a vacuum. The police exist in a historical context. The police exist together with the rest of society. And in places where we have conflict or where we have a colonial past, we have political tradition and we have elements in society which really impacts on how the police institutions, but also their practices today. And when we look at improving the police, we need to take all of this into account. We need to see it as the society as a whole that needs to work, and that the police is one element of that needs to heal from the past sometimes, and sometimes find new solutions of moving forward together. We need to look at that human rights in the context of policing is really not only about training of the police. Training has its part, but it's really about looking at what are the laws that exist in a country. Are human rights actually integrated in the laws? Have a country actually integrated in the laws the human rights commitments that they have made? Are policies and guidance, are all of these things that help the police, how they should behave in certain situations, are they also integrating human rights? Then we can look at how training may help the police to actually have the skills and the knowledge and the attitudes to apply the guidance in policies. And we can look at the institutional, what kind of culture the police are having to reinforce this and to ensure that senior commanders actually hold the police officers accountable for actually acting in accordance with this. And then there are other elements, external accountability mechanisms like government institutions, the judiciary has roles to play, even the international community and NGOs play an accountability role here to work together with the police to ensure that there is a constant dialogue of how to best function in a particular society and for the benefit of the communities. In order to do this, from a human rights perspective, when we talk about policing, there's a number of principles that we want to highlight. And some of those relate to respect for rule of law, that the police must not be above the law. They must also respect the law within the limits of their functions. but they must be transparent in how they operate, and to a certain extent that not their tactical plans or so on, but in general, what are the bases for how they operate. And they must also have attention to potentially vulnerable groups, not to give certain groups favors, but instead to allow those who have more problems in society to have the same right as anyone else to actually access rights within society. And that's the police role, to help and lift them up and be, in that sense, a human rights advocate, to ensure that those who does not have the possibility can access different rights that applies to everyone. There's also a victim-centered approach, do no harm, and non-discrimination are all key elements that needs to be integrated into the different functions of police. But it's not like a human rights course that the police can take that would change things. Human rights is a part and parcel of modern and professional policing in all of the different functional areas, the arrest, police, use of force, and so on. I want us to have this in mind when we start talking about militarization of the police, because that is a topic that has become more and more topical, particularly in relationship to when the police have committed certain human rights violations. And what are we then talking about when we talk about militarization of the police? Well, we're talking about when the police use different kind of equipment, tactics, training, or when there is a culture within the police or tactical approaches that relates to different ways relates to the military way of doing things. So militarization of the police is, in a way, it's dangerous when it changes the mindset of a police officer to often see things as going in a battle, but they're at war with certain elements that they need to win. And when, for example, a training goes to the point where it trains it in military tactics instead of law enforcement tactics, this can shift how a police officer approaches a situation. If it also depends, if a police officer is equipped with a certain, let's say, a rifle, we know from many studies that they're more likely to use it. So it's very important to not equip with certain weapons in certain situations. There are famous situations or infamous where actually armed forces have been asked to police, for example, demonstrations and so on, and with no training and with only weapons, and it's shown that then they're much more likely to start firing when they have no other options. But it's the same for the police. If they are put in a situation with weapons, with gun, and with tactical training to react in a certain way, they're much more likely to use that than some of the more traditional police methods like negotiation, de-escalation, and so on. I wanted to very briefly touch upon, in this context, the international framework for use of force, because this applies, almost all countries in the world has signed up, for example, to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And this, the right to life is a key human rights that is looked at both within certain other instruments, for example, the basic principles on use of force on firearms, but it's also looked at by certain oversight bodies like the Human Rights Committee and special rapporteurs that looks into country situations. And they have developed an international legal framework related to use of force that really bases on that use of force, first of all, must be legal. So the objective of a particular police operation must be legal. The use of force must be in conformity with that legal objective. So the police cannot use force to, for example, for a personal, have a personal objective, but they're in a personal disagreement with someone. No, they can only use it for their professional objectives, which needs to be stated in the law. The use of force must be necessary. If you can use something less in a situation, you have to use violate. You have to, for example, if you can use just your hands, sometimes the police in many stages, the first thing they do is hand techniques and their voice. These things are the first things you need to do. So it has to be necessary then to escalate the force to something else. And it needs to be proportional. So, for example, if someone steals a loaf of bread, you're not allowed to fire with an automatic rifle of them. That's not proportional. In that situation, the police should let the person run away with the loaf of bread, because to use lethal force, you can only do that when there is an imminent threat to life. So if someone has stolen a loaf of bread, there's not an imminent threat to life. And that goes then up and we can expand on that in different types of situations. Finally, I wanted to talk about a new principle that is not so called precaution, that really links to militarization of police, because the principle of precaution says that police commanders need to take into account other options when they plan operations. So if police officers are sent out for a certain task and they are not equipped, they don't have the right intelligence and so forth, and they may commit a human rights violation by killing someone. But it may be that the responsibility actually lies upstream with the commanders. And this relates also to the militarization of the police, but it's the commander's responsibility to see when it's appropriate to use certain sophisticated weapons and so on. Because, understand me right, there are certain situations when very sophisticated methods of use of force needs to be used, including weapons, where SWAT teams need to be used. When there is very high risks, hostage negotiations, armed robberies, and so on, you need trained police officer with the right equipment. If they risk being met by automatic weapons, they need to be able to perform their tasks. They need that specific training for those situations. But it's not the military training, it's law enforcement training using those equipment. It's not importing the military mindset, deploying police as if they were military. No, the really advanced and good practices of this are very specified, and they are not used to terrorize people or to create fear. They're used in very targeted way to uphold the rights of people and to do it with the help of some of those equipment. Very briefly, let me touch on a few situations where this has recently come to the front, the militarized use of policing. We have in May this year in Brazil, a very tragic situation in the Jacarezinho neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro, where the police deployed almost 250 people reportedly in a police operation in relation to drugs. And it went very wrong. I think 28 people were killed, several people were injured, and there are reports of people being executed point blank by the police in very tragic circumstances. All of this are being looked into, and it's being discussed also at the UN level. But it shows that when you deploy, armored carrier vehicles, and when you, for example, they came in very early in the morning, there were lots of people on the streets, and there was lots of cross-firing. They did not follow the normal police principle. It was more like a military assault from the descriptions that has come. And this is again, the police needs to use the police mindset, and their purpose is to serve the people. It's not a military war. It's to really instead to help the communities to deal with those things. And they have to then use different methods than what a military force would use. And this is the trick. So what's the alternative to a militarization of the police? Well, if we go back in time, already in the 1800s in the United Kingdom, there was a Home Minister, Robert Peel, who formulated these Peel principles, which was really in essence around that the police is also accountable to the people. Their purpose is not to oppress people or to implement a political agenda. They are there to decrease criminality and to serve the people, and they are accountable to the people, and they need the communities to uphold their services. This kind of policing by consent is today we see in many places, including within the United Nations police, and it's called community-based policing. And community-based policing really reaches out to the communities and includes the communities in important decisions and try to see what are the important elements for the communities that the police can do. They still do all of the other things as well that are important in terms of investigating crimes and so on, but they try to include the communities who are those who are closest to those situations within it, rather than having a more aggressive approach towards them. Now, we have had a lot of other really sad and tragic incidents, including in North America, and we've had in the United States. We have a Breonna Taylor incident in 2020, and the UN Human Rights Racial Justice Reports looked into that. That is another example of a situation which has really the trademarks of militarized policing approaches. We see a lot of similar cases coming up to front, which really harms the relationship between the police and the communities. And recent studies show that actually the militarization of the police is not effective. It's not reducing crime rates, and it's not necessarily making the police more safe. So on that notion, really I wanted to say that when the police go out to look into protests and to investigate crime, they need to engage with the community. They need to make the communities a part of the policing. This is part of the solution. For us who works with human rights, we need to find police officers within the police, because there are a lot of them who are very strong for human rights, and we need to work with them from within inside the police as well, to allow them to be empowered and to show how the human rights-based approach is a better option than the militarized approach, in the sense that we have seen in many cases recently. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very comprehensive review. Holly Mystery is an intern with us, and she's also a student at Fordham University, and she will ask you a question.
Thanks very much, Johan. Very interesting. And you kind of touched on what I wanted to ask already, but I was going to be more specific. As far as the training is concerned, you kind of said that the type of training is given, but I also wondered if the length of training makes a difference to how police act and how they react, because I think I've heard that in the US, for example, maybe 2 or 3 months of training is all that's given, whereas in some other countries, I think in Scotland anyway, where I'm from, it's at least 2 years. So how does that impact the way things are done?
Thank you very much for that really good question. Yeah, training is a complicated element, and for the policing in all of the different elements, I would say that it takes years, and training is a continuous thing. So you would usually, in many places, police training would be at least 2 or 3 years in different level, mixed with practice. And as I said, human rights is usually integrated into this. These are the good practices where we see it. So it's really important that the training takes into account and is mixed professional standards and real life situations, and that the police officers are also allowed to, during training exercises, being exposed to these kind of challenges that you see, that poses these human rights challenges that we see. and also that it includes of what is the police specific areas, what are their duties, when should the police act, and then maybe there are situations when the police should not be the ones to act. For example, on mental health, persons with mental health issues and so on. Do the police actually need to be the one? Well, sometimes they are the only one called, and this relates back. So there's a lot of training that can be done to understand some of those broader issues that goes beyond technical training of how to carry out an arrest or police and assembly from a technical sense. So you're right, it's very technical. So 6 months sounds very short to me for that, but training needs to also be mixed with practice, and even senior officers needs refresher trainings and go back to training and have workshops on certain key issues.
Thank you, Johan. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Karolina Łukasiewicz. Apologies for any mispronunciation of your name. She's doing a fellowship at the Center for Migration Research, and her research is focused on migration, migrant integration, and poverty policies. She has been studying various aspects of these policies over 15 years in the European and American cities. Karolina has been cooperating with various NGOs directly supporting immigrant communities. She was a researcher at the McSilver Institute of Poverty Policy and Research at New York University and at the Center for Evaluation and Analysis of Public Policies at the, help me, Karolina, the name of the
university.
Thank you. She received her postdoctoral training at the McSilver Institute of Poverty Policy and Research. She has a PhD in sociology and MA in European political sociology, and she is an adjunct professor at the Silver School of Social Work at the New York University. Please welcome Karolina.
Thank you for this introduction. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for organizing this great and very much needed webinar. I will be talking about the current situation at the Polish-Belarusian border and human rights violation taking place there, and instrumentalization of forced migrants and how they are being used and even weaponized by different political by different politicians. So let me start with the current situation. Since the summer of this year, Polish authorities have been reporting an increased number of undocumented border crossing between Poland and Belarus, and there is no clarity when it comes to the numbers, but Frontex, which is the EU border agency, reported reported in the last year around 7,000 attempts of border crossing in the eastern side of the EU border, which is large. It's not just Poland. These are also other country on the east side of the European Union. And just as a comparison, during the same period of time in the EU border with the Mediterranean, there were over 60,000 such cases. So the scale probably overall is not that large. But the problems of people at the border are very serious. So Polish non-profit organizations and human rights organizations reporting human rights violation or supporting immigrants at the border, they've been reporting helping people who have been multiple times pushed back at the border. So after approaching Polish border guards and saying the critical from the international law perspective, I want to apply for asylum, they would be afterwards just sent back to Belarus. And just so that you know, the border between Poland and Belarus is largely primordial forest. Now it's winter already in Poland, snowing, freezing temperatures, and probably, well, not quite know what is the actual number, but some hundreds, maybe thousands of people are winding around in this forest. Yes, so that's some of them, actually quite a lot, managed to get through the Poland, where they cannot apply for asylum, although they should. From an international law perspective, Poland is the site of a refugee convention and is obliged to process asylum claims when people request for asylum. Yet the current right-wing government in Poland is just simply not doing that, refusing and pushing people back to Belarus. The pushing back is sometimes very dramatic. We're talking about families with children who are being put to trucks and sent back, sometimes in the middle of the night, to hide it from activists and media, back to the border. There are like really dramatic situations happening there. Yet some 10,000 people managed to get through Poland to Germany, where they actually applied for asylum. And unlike Poland, Germany is processing every case in accordance with international and German law. Yes, so the situation is very dramatic, and in many ways it actually reminds the crisis of 2015-16 at the Mediterranean border. Probably some of you remember the kind of most iconic and dramatic picture of that crisis. That was Alan Kurdi, a child who was found dead after trying to cross the Mediterranean with his mother and brother and siblings who were also found dead. So similarly, during this crisis in the Polish-Belarusian border, children are also kind of symbols of the crisis. There are photos of or reports on children being sent back to the Belarusian border by Polish officials, Polish authorities, Polish border guards, police is involved, and of course military. And yeah, just actually a couple of days ago, there was a child missing, so was separated from, was trying with a family to cross. 4-year-old girl called Eileen was trying to cross the border together with her parents, and then she was separated. Her parents were pushed back to the Belarusian side by Polish border guard, and she went somewhere missing in the forest and hasn't been found until now. And now, what are just very briefly, what are the root causes behind this whole situation? So, well, there are many causes, but let's start with the Belarus. So in 2020, President of Belarus, there were presidential election, which many international organizations reported as a fraud, and the president who didn't win, in fact, Łukaszenko, remained in seat. And in response, there were sanctions put in place on Belarus by the European Union, by the US as well. And then in response, Łukaszenko decided to use migrants as a leverage while negotiating the sanctions with the EU. So basically, he started granting visa to people in the most horrifying condition in the war zones in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, and bringing them in to Belarus with a promise of easy border crossing to Poland, to the European Union, which already at the same time, Polish government were kind of playing with this situation. So in Poland currently there is like a very conservative anti-immigrant government who also decided to profit on this situation. And while Łukaszenko was forcing people through the Polish-Belarusian border, Polish government started pushing everyone back, even though it shouldn't be the case according to the international conventions, but also according to Polish constitution. So yes, and the response of Polish government was completely disproportionate to the whole crisis. So first of all, there was a kind of state of emergency set up on the Polish-Belarusian border, with journalists being forbidden to enter, human rights activists, other groups supporting immigrants. Nobody until now, in fact, is let in to a direct border zone, which in fact includes 183 towns. So it's not that small. And then Poland in October actually introduced internal law that legalized pushbacks, which is kind of, well, illegal also from Polish law, but yet such a law was put in place. Then Poland started building a wall that probably sounds familiar to you, between a wall on Polish-Belarusian border to prevent migrants from crossing. As we know, it never works, so that's also the case. Yes, and basically brought. So we're talking about probably even currently on the Belarusian side, Łukaszenko is holding some around 3,000 people. Łukaszenko doesn't allow them to go back and wait for another opportunity to push them back to Poland. But at the same time, so that's the number we know, 3,000 refugees, and at the same time, Polish government gathered on the border some overall 20,000 militaries, 12,000 soldiers, 8,000 border guards, and around 1,000 of police officers. So this militarization is like really surprising, at least to say. And well, we would hope there would be, if not on the Polish side, so maybe on the side of institutions or international institutions, some more firm response, but it didn't happen. Different authorities visited the site, including UNHCR. There were NGOs such as Human Rights Watch. European Parliament has a kind of debate about the situation, but bottom line, nothing has changed. Not just that. Currently, EU is processing. Discussing a new law proposal which would allow for fast-tracking asylum cases by border guards, for instance, which is like extremely problematic. And the 2015 crisis of humanitarian protection in Europe highlighted exactly that speeding up or a kind of fast processing cases, meaning, for example, a border guard talk to a person for a few minutes and decide whether his case can go on or shall we stop here. That's definitely it's definitely not how things should work. So talking about human rights violation, well, apart from international law, apart from like different international, I mean, of course, first of all, there is a refugee convention talking about the international refugee law. Well, I'm talking largely here about Poland and not about Belarus, because we know about multiple human rights violation happening in Belarus, and a handful of people, I guess, on the side of European Union would expect any kind of humanitarian standards from Belarus, especially like in Poland in the last couple of years, the largest group of people seeking asylum are refugees from persecuted in Belarus. So let's maybe not look deeper into the Belarusian side, but like in case of Poland, there is the Refugee Convention, there is a Convention on the Rights of the Child. When we think about the families with children being pushed back without providing any shelter, food, and so on, migrants are criminalized. And right now, this new legislation set up in Poland, which, by the way, kind of reflect what has been happening since 2015 and 16 in Greece or Greek-Turkish border. So different attempts to legalize this process, to legalize pushback and to criminalize migrants. So and there are also different examples of simple racism happening at the border. So as I mentioned, there is this area on the Polish side where people are not allowed to enter, yet refugees are trying to cross the border, are trying to get to the Poland. So all around the eastern border in Poland, there are tons of police cars or border guards who are in the first instance looking for black and brown faces to distinguish whether it's a potential refugee, and then stopping them. Yes, and
thank you.
Yes, so I think I can. Yes, I can stop here.
All right, thank you so much. Sorry, we're kind of running out of time. We do have one question for you. And as your adjunct at NYU, we have an NYU student, Amanda Newlove, who is also an intern in our office. Amanda?
All right, I've been unmuted. Thank you, Karolina. Very interesting. I know that there's not a lot of focus on this in the media right now, so I appreciate you being here with us. My question for you is, who are the key actors who are helping to alleviate the hardships for the immigrants at the borders, whether that it's NGO, medical groups, who is there trying to alleviate the hardships?
Yes. Thank you for this question. This is excellent questions, and I should start that there is a massive activism, grassroots activism happening all around the country among like all sorts of ordinary people cooking soups and sending them to the border area in jars where people prepare like bags, hanging them on they call it safety bags with like warm clothes and warm food in the forest. But like the main actors are organization or supporting people there is what are nonprofit organizations. So nonprofits who prior the current crisis has been either human rights group or organizations just serving immigrant communities, immigrant service providers. There's 14 of them, which created what is called a border group. And they themselves, or with support of volunteers, patrol the forest. And in the patrols, there are like medical workers. There are also lawyers who help file official asylum claims or just provide meals. There's one specific group of of doctors as well who are helping people on site. Although, as I mentioned, nobody is allowed to enter the direct border area, but on the border of this area, it's a huge forest, so people are just patrolling this area all the time and trying to help. So there's also like a massive activism, as I mentioned, just around the country. There is a group called Families Without Borders who organize protests with children.
Thank you.
Like highlighting the situation of the children.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Joshua Weir is a licensed clinical social worker. He's a social worker for family medicine, a therapist, co-author and training specialist for Children of Promise in New York City. He spent the past 3 years in Crown Heights community providing psychotherapy to older teens and adults who normally wouldn't have access to therapy. His expertise is in curricular focus on dismantling the stigma of mental health care within the Black Caribbean community in order to create healing spaces for those who are preventing them from getting access. Joshua's work has historically been rooted in analysis through anti-oppressive approach to discourse by assessing how the micro and macro levels and meso levels within systems impact the micro. Assisting in the creation of college-level curricula within Sing Sing Correctional Facility for men who are not expected to be released from incarceration. He also has created a mass incarceration conversation series with Dr. Kirk A. James, which provided conversation addressing the impact of hyper-incarceration of subjugated communities. Please welcome Joshua.
Thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure to be here virtually and share space with you all. And so it's a privilege to be able to think outside of one's own space. You know, as a Black American, as a Black man growing up in the United States, it's hard to think about what's going on overseas when there is a particular issues going on right at your doorstep. And so what it seems like is that the two main ingredients within American culture is fear and violence. Without fear and without violence, what is America? Right? From the moment this country was established, there was bloods on the hands of the founders. So we look at the erasure of indigenous people and the enslavement of African people, and it seems from the moment the European eyes saw the Black and brown people, they deemed us as less than, inferior, dangerous, something to fear, something to abuse, and then annihilate. If we look at excerpts from a book by Winthrop Jordan called The White Man's Burden, we see the depiction of the Black person's existence through the lens of a European. The Black person's existence in this book was spoken about in a way that was dehumanized. A book that was written in 1976, telling the narrative of how white people have historically viewed darker skin. So we look at one of his excerpts and we are able to gain insight into the dehumanization and sexualization of the Black person's existence. And in the moment of dehumanization and sexualization, we see white supremacy deem Blackness as disgusting, evil, unintelligent, dangerous, and again, something to annihilate. This excerpt from Jordan detailing the depiction of Black people through the lens of the white people shows the essence of anti-Blackness. Even though anti-Blackness is global, I will focus on what I have been forced to consider home. And so you all may kind of wonder, where is this actually going, right? And as we understand that, as Johan said in the beginning of our conversation, police aren't in a vacuum, right? So we can't expect police officers to be distant from what has culturally been taught to them from birth, right, from inception. So if this country, as we know, is rooted in white supremacy, is rooted in fear of the other, right, violence towards the other, then how can we expect the police force that is funded by this government to act any differently? So as James Baldwin would say, I'm an American, right? But not in the sense of pride and hope in the country that I live in. It is more so a statement that my people have unnecessarily died and shed blood for this country, right? So my ancestors were slaves deemed to be all the dehumanizing things we were mentioned to be, right? My ancestors were harmed by the trauma of slavery, pig laws, sharecropping, Jim Crow, hyper incarceration, stop and frisk, 3-strike rules, war on drugs, war on crime, right? And government sanctioned murders. So time and time again, Black people have watched people who look like us be lynched, whether it is a tree in Seneca Village, or it is a knee to the neck in Minnesota, whatever it may be. We have seen lynchings, and a lynching doesn't have to come with a rope. It can come with a 9mm pistol and a badge. And so we have seen violence committed against us by the hands of people who we are paying with our Black tax dollars, settlements being paid out with our tax dollars, and officers not being held accountable for murdering Black people, Black and brown people. And so in this country, I'm not sure if we've ever really seen, at least as Black people have ever seen police officers as rescuers or people who we can go to for assistance, because we have always been policed in the most brutal ways possible. So if we look at the history of slavery and we look at slave catchers, police officers currently established in the United States right now are not too far removed from that history. If we look at the autobiography of Sata Shakur, she talks about the New Jersey state troopers and how their uniforms were that who mirrored of white supremacist groups, right? And so we have to think about like how the infrastructure of the police force within the United States, particularly not only targets the poor and the marginalized, but what it's rooted in, right? And how it's rooted in anti-Blackness and how it's rooted in white supremacy and capitalism and what it does to the country as a whole, right? So we look at this, even the spending on policing, right? According to, you do literally a 2-second Google search, right? And we can find out that the United States has spent $21 trillion on foreign and domestic militarization. Yet we struggle to provide free healthcare. We struggle to provide free education. We struggle to provide folks with quality healthcare. We struggle to decrease our carbon footprint. We struggle to actually build an infrastructure that works for people, working class people in this country. And so who is the threat, right? What is America trying to create? What safety are they actually striving for when no one is feeling safe? You know, when we think about safety, no one thinks about police officer with the AR-15, right? No one thinks about canines sniffing their bags. No one thinks about having to be pat down or go through metal detectors. When we think about safety as ultimately a utopia, and a safety is without violence. Safety is without having the measures that prevents possible violence. Safety doesn't breed anxiety or fear or violence. And so, you know, when we think about militarization of policing, I am very much so for the defunding of policing, right? And the reason why I am for that, and the reason why I advocate for that is because we see that the money can be used elsewhere. Militarizing police officers, that doesn't stop crime, right? What prevents crime is having resources in the community, having, education in the community, and having a possible way of dreaming, right? Having resources that allow people to dream. And so as we know America to be, it has been historically punitive. And so it's really up to not only, of course, I'm a social worker, so it's not only up to the social workers trying to advocate in Albany, but it's also like the common person being able to see the detriment of white supremacy within our country. So, yeah. And I'm open to questions.
Thank you. We do have one question from Rose Singleton, who's an MSW student at Adelphi University and an intern in our office.
Hi, good afternoon again. Joshua, question about the effects of trauma related to the militarization of the police, long-term effects, cost to the economy because of the trauma. I'm curious about, and then I also had a question. Johan touched on training of police, but how do we really overcome the implicit bias in police training, especially in the United States? If it's so deeply rooted in racism, is there ever a way to clean it up or, get back to the point where people did feel that the police were there to help and support them?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start first with trainings. There is truly, my belief is that there's no way that a 6-month training is going to dismantle a lifelong belief that is rooted in anti-Blackness, right? And so, like, there has to be. I think sometimes what America does is it tries to pick one solution and say this is the solution, and we're just going to go that route. But there's multiple routes to go. And so I'm a little bit more radical, right? So I believe that, one, police officers and civilians should be disarmed. I don't think anyone, really, we shouldn't have a country with guns. You know what I mean? Like, I think the accessibility to firearms, not only for civilians, but to police officers who are not too far removed from civilians, because I went to school with a couple of people who become police officers, and I wouldn't trust them with a screwdriver, let alone a pistol. So, it's really important to be able to understand that, one, how do we police, right, in a different way, right? And in a different way, it becomes not only trainings, but also keeping safety in mind. And so safety, last time I checked, having a gun around is not causing anyone to feel safe. So I think that is the defunding of police officers, putting more funding in schools and mental health resources for folks, into housing, into healthcare, things that actually prevent crimes. When someone has something to live for, they don't want to take a risk and commit a crime to get where they have to be. So most of when I worked with students in East New York, a lot of times when they were stealing or when they were, trying to basically catch a come up, it's because they didn't have anything. They didn't have like food at home. They didn't have money in their pocket. So a lot of times they were selling drugs or robbing folks or scamming because they couldn't afford what they saw or what they wanted, right? And so, or they didn't believe that the route of education and waiting, 6 years after they graduate from college, et cetera, that they can get those things, right? Like, so the soft skills aren't there because deprivation is there. So, I think it comes down to is a lot of points that we can tackle when it comes to ultimately what policing will look like. In regards to the overall impact of the trauma of militarization of policing, I think it's persistent PTSD pretty much, right? Like we call it post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's persistent traumatic stress disorder, right? You're constantly triggered by seeing police officers. Some folks, we talk about community policing, but some folks are seeing the police officer that harassed them every day on their way home, on their way to work, or their way to school, or wherever they're going. They see the same police officer. I had a student who was assaulted by a police officer in the back of a police car, and he had to see him at least once or twice a week every time he went to the train station. And so to think about the trauma that comes with not only this generation, but generations before that, right, who had to prevent any situation of them being lynched or them being harmed by police officers or police adjacent folks, right? And so there's a lot, to navigate through, but in regards to what trauma looks like, it lives in the body. It causes hypertension, it causes diabetes, it causes so many different chronic conditions that ultimately decrease the life expectancy of Black and brown folks living in America.
Thank you so much, Joshua. We'll now move to generalized questions. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you see reactions. If you push on the reactions button, there's a signal there that says raise hand, and that will indicate to me that you would like to ask a question. And we would want your questions to be brief. And if you start making a statement, I'll probably cut you off because we want brief questions. We're going to give the first question to our remaining intern, Brooklyn Darling, who is studying in the global program at SUNY New Paltz. And you get the first question, Brooklyn.
Hello, thank you. And this goes to anyone who would like to answer. So my question is, are there global policy recommendations that could help reduce the use of force on immigrants at the borders? And anyone can take it.
So Johan, Karolina, Joshua, somebody want to take that? Karolina, it's kind of in your wheelhouse, so we'll let you take it.
Yeah, I could try. Well, I think the problem is that we do have a lot of good laws or regulations set in place already, such as the Refugee Convention. And in Europe, there is also like a unified asylum framework explaining how people should be treated when coming to the border in a regular or irregular way and requesting asylum. The problem is more what happens with the policies on the ground or what is not happening. Thankfully, there are some mechanisms in Europe put in place, such as your European Human Rights Court. And I think that's a very important institution. Unfortunately, there is nothing similar in the United States, but in Europe, where countries fail their citizens in whichever, or pretty much not just citizens, anybody, and for whatever reasons, the legal pathway to protect your right in a country you're in is not working, then you can apply to or file a case in a human rights court, which is actually currently ongoing. There is tomorrow there will be, I'll send a link, another event talking about violation of human rights at the border, and there will be border activists who will be explain how from Greece, how they prepared a court case against the government of Greece for violating human rights, and they will help activists on the Polish side prepare such a law. And then it's not universal, it's just working for specific people who filed the case or group case, but at least for those people it will work, and there is a hope of a precedent that moving forward things will get better.
Thank you. Any questions? If I don't see hands, I will start calling on people like a teacher. Curtis, you must have a question.
Thank you, Bruce. Yeah, I'm the current president of Unitarian Universalists for Justice in the Middle East, and we have a very serious concern with the role of Israel in selling, marketing its means of crowd control that it advertises as having been tested and used on its efforts to control the Palestinians. And this is a highly militarized form of control where the police and the military work in concert to control and dominate the people that are Palestinians within their territories. And so you might, I recommend a book by Jeff Halper on where he talks about this international marketing of Israeli techniques of crowd control and surveillance. We're all aware of the recent NSO case where the Israeli company NSO was found to
okay, no statements, just a
no
question,
statements.
please.
Okay. Well, I wonder if people might talk about the role of Israel in the international militarization of police. That's certainly, I think, something to pay attention to.
So I think maybe that's Johann's wheelhouse, and I'm actually going to change the question a little bit and come to Joshua after Johan.
Thank you. Yeah, we are having a number of ongoing commissions of inquiries that relates to the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories in Palestine and so on, from a number of years back to today in Palestine. And there are elements of that relates to how the Israeli military or police have dealt with certain situations. So I don't know the particular equipment that you're referring to now, but generally, yes, we would probably have concern with some of the methods that has been used in the past in relation to policing in Palestine by the Israelis. It certainly is more of a militarized approach compared to policing by consent, obviously. So yes, I would share concerns on perhaps the marketing of that to other places as a good practice. But I'm saying that without having seen what this particular thing that they are selling would be. There are a lot of different types of equipment, and some of it may be less controversial than others.
Oh, Joshua, I'm going to turn this question around a little bit. I was at a high-level meeting at the United Nations, and we were talking about anti-Semitism. And a rabbi came up to me and he said, "Who do you represent?" And I said, "I represent the Unitarian Universalist Association." And he said, "Well, that means you're anti-Semitic." I said, "How do you figure that? Where do you get that from?" He said, "Well, you support Black Lives Matter." I said, "Yes, absolutely, we support Black Lives Matter." And he said, "Well, does Black Lives Matter supports the Palestinians?" So I'm wondering if you could sort of address the I guess the feeling that people that support Black Lives Matter have some sympathy with the Palestinian situation, and if you have any insights into that.
Oh, you want to get me in trouble? So I mean,
well, don't get in too much trouble. Remember John Lewis said, "Get in good trouble."
Yeah. So I think there's definitely at least for me, I can only speak for the eye. When we see like militarization of a force, right? We start to see Black and brown folks, losing their homes, right? Losing access to family, losing access to one another. And we see a highly militarized force that's being funded not only by our country, by the United States, but others abroad. we do see some similarities in how white supremacy also works. You know, it's hard to not see the comparison of who gets to be in the seat of narrating who is evil, who is the person, who is the terrorist, right? We get to label, you know, folks who are in the driver's seat, and usually it is usually white men who are in the driver's seat of being able to tell a narrative of who is the terrorist, who is the person who is a danger, right? We've seen a war, you know, war just ended because we, as the United States, as a country, defined a group of people as terrorists and as evil, right? How many lives have been torn because of that, right? How many US soldiers, how many folks in the Middle East lost their lives because of that, right? Just because of a label of terrorists, right? And so you have to think about why, you know, Black folks in the States will then see that situation and be triggered, right? And be traumatized or reminded of our own suffering, where policing is so high in our communities as well. So.
Any other questions? I do have one here in the chat. I don't see any other hands up. So the question in the chat is again for Johan. And are there any examples you might share successful moments to reduce, or movements to reduce militarization of national police forces? What was present in those areas socially, politically, et cetera, that made it successful? And thanks to all the speakers. So Johan, where have you seen some success, and what made that successful?
Thank you very much. It's difficult to say, because I don't think we have one example where we said that this have been, you know, completely successful. So there are elements, but I think it's been successful. And that is, unless we go back to what I mentioned before, where there's sort of a paradigm shift in the 1800s around policing. But I think that what we see in some countries who are, and it's less in developed countries and more in developing countries, we can see that there is an openness as civil society and politician joins together to allow the police to try different new areas. We have a number of countries in Asia or in Africa who has received funding to change certain elements. They may have, for example, reviewed policies and linked that into that they've received support in terms of training or model police stations and other things. So they have been able to take one particular area and build on that area to make that area more reaching out to communities, or to reduce a heavy-handed approach. There's also what we have seen as being successful in some places is where it's been possible to actually put an emphasis on accountability measures, because accountability to be successful need to work both within the government institutions, so within the police and with judiciary and so on, as well as outside independent accountability measures, including civil society. So I think that all of these elements needs to be in place and work jointly. So, but for that to happen, there needs to be some kind of a political or societal push for the police. Again, they're a part of society, so they're not just going to change modus of operandus usually from one day to another. It really needs to be something that comes through both the communities and from the political levels. And then you may be able to jointly find new ways of trying things out. But there are elements of good practices of this that exist also in the United States and so on. So I think it's about learning from those good practices within the communities like in the United States, where it has worked, where certain things has worked, because it usually doesn't work taking good practices from other contexts, which are very different and so on. So my usual recommendation is really to look at the elements in the way that a lot of Black Lives Matter movement have done, and the advocacy around it, to look at the root causes and how to move forward within this particular context and move step by step. It's not going to change overnight, as Joshua said. It's the victims are traumatized for generations, and in a way, the police are also traumatized in their own way, and it's going to take generations to move to something that works better. But small steps can be taken, and we can be a part of initiating that.
Any questions? Please put in the chat or raise your hand. Yes, Mark.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I actually have a question for you, Bruce.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, has the UUA, either the UUSC or the UN office, taken a position in opposition to American police officers being trained in Israel? I know that both community as well as federal, such as Immigration and Border and FBI, have all, many have had training in Israel. And if not, if not, no UU groups have done that, would you support, say, an action of immediate witness at General Assembly to do that?
I don't really know enough about this. It's actually the first time I'm hearing about this. It sounds it sounds like an interesting topic. I'll just say that, interesting being a very ambiguous word there. I would love for you to send me some information so I could learn more about it, and certainly doing an action of immediate witness at the next General Assembly would be a way of bringing attention to this. Just for those of you who are not Unitarian Universalists, we do have a democratic way of running our denomination, and we have general assemblies, and people are able to raise what we call an action of immediate witness and get it voted on. And if it's voted with sufficient votes, then it obligates the denomination to take action on that. So that wouldn't be an appropriate way. Any other questions? I'm looking in the chat to see if there's anything there. Oh, yes, Susan.
Yeah, hi. Bruce, thank you very much for that story about your conversation with the rabbi at, I guess, at the UN, and the accusation of anti-Semitism. My question simply is, are there people who agree with me, my perception, that this knee-jerk accusation of anti-Semitism is an example of the big lie? And over the past several years, we've seen many big lies coming from former administration in this country. And I just don't know if anyone has put the concept out there. But the more I think about it, the more I think it's a good example of that.
Thank you for your question. Any of our speakers want to address that?
I would just ask for more clarification on the big lie. Like, this is the first time I'm hearing about that specific term. So if it's possible, I can get like just a more clarification of like the big lie.
I would say the Trump administration saying that climate change is a hoax is a big lie. The election was stolen is a big lie. And those are the main ones I can think of right now. It's something that's so big, so pervasive, that it's really hard to, it's hard to counter it, certainly in a few sentences.
And you know, I think what she's referring to is where I said, you know, I was at this meeting and it was on anti-Semitism, and they said, well, you know, you're anti-Semitic, and I said, how is that? And they said, because you support Black Lives Matter. And so I don't get that. So it's branding people, or it's kind of like cancel culture, where you're canceled as an anti-Semite for supporting Black Lives Matter, when really one has nothing to do with the other, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking more in the context of support for justice for the Palestinians. In many circles, that's automatically interpreted as anti-Semitism.
Yeah. All right, Rose, you have your hand up.
Oh, yes, there was one question in the chat. Someone was asking for examples of actions that individual citizens can do to reduce police militarization. Is there anything that the average citizen can do, I guess, maybe based in the US, to reduce it, circumvent it? Is there anything we can do, you know? Besides filming it, besides filming it, which is a good thing, because without filming, I mean, would there have even been a positive outcome in the George Floyd murder charge? But, anything else we can do? Do we join community boards? Do we petition? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's more than just the individual effort. I think even like on Western culture, is always the lone wolf taking on the big situation and doing it on their own. But it takes, in the words of Bell Hooks, rest in peace, that it takes community, like and to be against a system that is filled with hate, that is filled with the binary of putting folks in boxes and oppressing folks. I think when it comes to actually radicalizing, it's the love principle, right? Being able to imagine something more, voting for politicians who actually have our best interests at heart, voting for politicians who are actually in the streets speaking to the people, right? And like actually have the understanding of what people need. So like who are also aligned with love principles. So it takes more than just individual person. I think it's going to take a lot of voting. It's going to take a lot of community board meetings. It's going to take a lot of structure that is more than just one person.
Thank you. I'll go to Johan next. Johan, I don't know if you have a question or if you have an answer.
No, I just wanted to comment on this as well, because I agree with Joshua. It takes more than one person, but at the same time, I think all activism sort of bases on that we do take action in whatever way we can. So I really encourage people to join webinars like this one and write into your papers, talk to your local politicians and others, whoever's influence, and raise questions and so on. And also, wherever the opportunity comes with the police. I mean, in many places, I think in the United States, for example, there is politically elected police commanders and so on. So those discussions, wherever they are possible, need to be had. And it's through dialogue that one can find ways. And I always say, you may not change a system as a person, but you can have a dialogue and have a little seed taking place in someone. And if we all do that is a start. So I think we can all do something, but we have to be realistic that of what we can achieve, at least in
I loved how you started your talk, and you talked about the high-ranking police official in Kathmandu going to the demonstrators and talking to them, and then leading the demonstrators on their demonstration, and having a high-ranking police officer actually be part of the demonstrators, and first of all briefing them as to what they can do and what they can't do, and then leading the demonstration. We had some really serious violence here in New York City, with Black Lives Matter not too long ago. And I'm just wondering if a high-ranking New York police officer led the demonstrators, I think the outcome would have been much different. Johan, are you aware of any other country or any other place where that has been done? Because I think it's genius. It's wonderful.
Well, it has in different ways, perhaps. There's a compendium of good practices that came out of some of the protests in Europe around a few years ago. And some of the good practices there really talks about that to engage, for the police to engage with the communities, to be very proactive and to, as I said, facilitate, to have knowledge about it. And to have knowledge, you really need to engage and understand the dynamics of those who are going to protest, and to appoint actually police focal points for those to discuss with, so that they can understand what the police are going to do and how they're going to do, and that there is a line of communications. Because sometimes the real problem when policing protests is if the police and the protester can't speak. And maybe that a certain part of a protest is getting out of hand. And then the police needs to talk to the organizer saying, you need to get this group under control, because otherwise we'll need to remove them, not stop the whole process. But that kind of discussion needs to be there, and it needs to happen before, so that it then can exist also when things may be more tense. So these kind of good practices do exist, and so on. But again, it's really built on that there is a relationship between the police and the communities, and that does not happen if you have a sort of a war mentality, that we're at war with each other, because then the dialogue is never going to start, and it's very difficult to find the bridges between those issues. So there are individual police officers and so on who really have some good practices in this, and not only in Europe and Asia. There are other examples as well. Sometimes it's individuals with a lot of courage and personal convictions, and sometimes it's a more of an organized approach from police institutions.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Elaine Congress from Fordham University put in the chat that I guess the newly appointed police chief of New York City is an African-American woman for the first time. I hope that helps. Anybody have any? Joshua's nodding his head, Rosa's nodding her head. So I guess that's a sign that can help things along. I agree. I think when we have women and women of color in positions of authority, I think the chances of having better outcomes are much higher, personally.
I mean, but like an old saying goes, is that not all skin folk are kinfolk, right? And so sometimes I would just like to see how it pans out, because we've also seen this particular administration with Kamala Harris as vice president, and things not particularly going the way that we expected it to go in regards to just student loan debt, just how immigration was just handled not too long ago at the border. And so like we're hoping that hopefully this person is aligned with some of the things that New Yorkers need, especially the folks of color living in New York and trying to stay in New York, so.
And if she's not, then we do what you were recommending before.
Vote.
And vote, yes.
Yes, please.
All right. Well, if there are no more questions, gone. Well, I really want to thank our
Bruce, Dana,
Oh.
sorry, has a question.
Oh, Dinah, are you there?
Yes.
I mean, I saw you before.
I
You still
put
have
it
the
down.
question.
Yeah, thank you. Just a comment. I want to just underscore a couple of things that have been said, which is police are human beings. Some of them make good choices, some of them make bad choices. There are trends that we have to pay attention to. There's definitely prejudice within the police force, and we have to push back against it. But I also want to underscore that getting involved locally is very important, because police are local, and getting involved in your city and town budgetary discussions to see what are they spending money on, and what are they doing? Are they accepting cast off military equipment? Because that happens at the local level. So again, underscoring register to vote, vote, the idea of voting love, voting for candidates who support love, pushing policies that are loving policies and not punitive and carceral policies. So just plugging that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I was actually going to mention, and it actually happened a lot during the Obama administration. And of course, I love Barack Obama, but he looked at surplus military equipment and said, oh, we got all this surplus military equipment. Why not just give it to police forces? And then some of this equipment had never been used. And that's how our police forces got a lot of the military equipment that they have. And I'm sure his intentions were good, but I think that was a mistake. And police don't need that kind of equipment. They don't need that kind of training either. And I have been reminded that our time is up, so I will let us go. I really want to thank our speakers. I want to thank all of our audience members, all of our questioners, all the participants. Thank you very much for being here. This is recorded. We will post the recording, and I hope we keep this conversation going and have these discussions again soon. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.